Good morning or afternoon. My name is Dorina Petrovsky, and I'm the Junior Chair of the Gerontological Society of America's Emerging Scholars and Professionals Organization Webinar Task Force. Along with Evan Pliss, Joanna Chase, and Megan McCutcheon, we would like to welcome you to this webinar, our sixth installment of the ESPO Professional Development Webinar Series. The title of this webinar is More Than Just Memes, Using Social Media and Technology to Boost Your Career. Our speaker, Dr. Melissa Batchelor Murphy, will explore relevant issues related to using social media and technology. Dr. Batchelor Murphy is a family nurse practitioner, a 2014 to 2017 Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Nurse Faculty Scholar, and the Assistant Professor at Duke University School of Nursing. On a more personal note, Dr. Batchelor Murphy is an excellent informal mentor and has been an informal mentor to me when I had questions about my career, life, and next steps. We will allow around 15 minutes towards the end of the presentation for questions or discussion topics. You can type your questions using the control panel on your screen in the question box area at any time during the presentation. You can also contribute today via our Twitter webinar hashtag, which is hashtag professional media, also found on the bottom of each of our slides. Thank you to our speaker for her time and effort in preparing this webinar, and thank you to our audience for your attendance. We hope you find this an educational, useful, and meaningful experience. I'll turn it over to Dr. Batchelor Murphy now.
Okay, thank you, Dorina, and would like to thank the ESPO group for inviting me to do this webinar for you. And Dorina mentioned the hashtag for professional media that you can use throughout the broadcast. And then this is a slide that I usually save for the end of my presentations. It kind of allows people to connect with me after a presentation, but in this case, I'm giving this to you a little bit early in case you wanted to tweet and add me in there also. So social media, there are a lot of different options. It can be extremely overwhelming. And so what I'm going to do is kind of pick just a few of these because in 45 minutes we cannot possibly talk about all of the different possibilities. So I'm going to choose to talk about the ones that I've used, which happen to all be on the top line here, that I've used to advance my career and to connect with other professionals around the country and actually around the world. So how I got started with this, probably this isn't something that you really get in the content of your doctoral program, but I was a Hartford pre- and postdoc fellow, and part of their professional development was to do different leadership conferences, and they also did like a summer communications conference. So that's kind of when I began to hear about how to use social media, and it began to be kind of pushed probably in like 2008, 2009 timeframe. Facebook, that's kind of was an easy one to kind of get started with. Typically use Facebook more for started off using it for personal reasons, and now have moved into very limited professional networking through Facebook. But what really got me interested in technology are these GNEC podcasts. So as a doctoral student, and I was also a full-time faculty member at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, and the Harvard Foundation partnered with the American Academy of Nursing and did a faculty development institute that they called GNEC, so Geriatric Nursing Education Consortium, and they developed 9 modules, and they hosted 6 conferences around the United States, and part of their outcomes were they trained 818 faculty in almost all 50 states, and I think Canada and maybe one other country as well. And I attended that first session, and as I was sitting in the audience, I really wished that I could kind of bottle those presenters up because I was a new educator and we had these really stellar presenters. And I said, if I could just bottle them up and take them home, then that would really solve a lot of my problems in trying to develop my teaching expertise. About a year later, got picked up as a faculty pass attendee and pitched the idea, and they funded me to do the 9 modules as podcasts. So that they were published in 2010, and they've now been accessed over 40,000 times in over like 40 countries. And I thought, you know, what are the odds that that many people will actually read my publications? So it really got me thinking about how could I harness the power of social media to get my message out there, you know, as an educator. And then as I was finishing my PhD, now how do I take it to the next step and kind of get my voice out there as a scientist and aging expert. So my progression has kind of been like Facebook, Twitter, then YouTube, and then because you can't do everything all in one day, I actually still have next steps around creating a website and a blog, and so we will just kind of talk through this. But you need to be really smart about how to do this because we all have competing demands, and I think one of the questions when one of you signed up was around how do you do this without having this personal life intrusion. And so obviously fast forward 8 years, I mean this hasn't consumed my life, but it is something that's always been kind of on the back burner. So making sure that as you're setting your goals that they're specific, you know, and you kind of have this plan that's realistic for what you can actually achieve given the time and resources that you have. So probably one of the most helpful things to me was around developing a plan. I went to a summer communications conference in Chicago and sat down with one of the facilitators of that conference, and she kind of said, what do you think you can get done in the next 6 months? What do you think you can do in the next year? And where would you like to kind of see this for disseminating your work in the next 3 years? So look for that. That was one training opportunity, and there have been others, especially if you're in an academic institution. There are other opportunities for you to attend training sessions and kind of develop your skill set over time, and realizing that you don't have to do everything all at once. So some of the reasons that people use social media is being part of the conversation. And I don't know if you guys remember about a year ago when the Miss America pageant came on and she wore her stethoscope, there was a big kind of media frenzy around that particular incident and the comment by the, I guess the host of the View. And there was a huge social media backlash there by nurses, and you know that's just one way to become part of the conversation around, you know, when things are happening within your profession that you want to comment on. It also helps you to stay current. I've seen a lot of calls for grant funding, calls for manuscript submissions, and I often, if I get those in an email, I'll flip them back out into one of my social media outlets. Building professional relationships, especially during conferences. It's a way for people that are attending the conference to know that you're there if they're also on social media. And that begins to help you build that professional network, because then you have something to approach that person that you wanted to get to meet by saying, oh, I saw your tweet, you know. And that always is kind of like a nice icebreaker for starting a personal conversation and building that professional network that you'll need over the entire course of your career. People use social media to recruit for studies, to promote services and different programs, and to drive change. So there's lots of different reasons as to why, but you'll just need to be very clear about why you want to use social media. So starting with Facebook, this is the GSA Facebook page. And there are 2 different ways to use Facebook to connect with, and actually with LinkedIn and Twitter also. But you connect with individuals and you also connect with organizations. So if you're at a conference, to post pictures of the staff, you know, to kind of figure out what the sound bites are from the presenters, you know, and just make a comment while you're live at that conference. If there are things that come through and you know, on the news, upcoming events, it's a nice way to kind of have a little bit more space to make a comment to your peers, you know, and other people within your own network. So you can like individuals, you can like organizations, and then joining other groups of nursing professionals. So my research focus is helping older adults with dementia to eat. So I'm connected with the Alzheimer's Association in the U.S., the UK, local, because I'm in the D.C. metro area. That's where I live, even though I work in North Carolina. But it's really helped me kind of develop another network with a move. So then we'll talk a little bit about LinkedIn. So Facebook tends to be more personal, or that's kind of the way I see more people using it, versus LinkedIn is kind of the more professional side of this. And so while you may not have some of your colleagues on Facebook, because some people have an aversion to being on Facebook, you may still be able to find them on LinkedIn. And with LinkedIn, there's a way to kind of post more of your CV, to establish your expertise, connect with colleagues and peers and other organizations through your profile page. And then posing questions to a particular group, and if people have time, they can give you feedback. So the next two slides should show you the difference. One of the things I found as I've kind of gone along is that as an academic and as a researcher, we tend to represent ourselves that way to the world. So we do a lot within, like if you put your name there, you can see Dr. Appleby has Executive Director of GSA, versus looking at someone who's more in business. They tend to put more of their kind of credentials underneath their name instead of their academic or institutional title. So you'll see it done both ways, but this is a screenshot from a computer, but if you look at LinkedIn profile pages as they come up on your phone, it actually looks a lot nicer to have it kind of with these hash marks in between kind of what you're known for. So for mine, it says nurse, author, speaker, and aging expert, because those are the four big kind of prongs around when people see my site, what I want them to kind of know about me. Moving on to Twitter. The thing with Twitter is you only have 140 characters to say what you have to say. And then with this particular platform, there's a little bit of a learning curve because you would say, like, you would put the hashtags in for the conference you're at. You could use the hashtag of the person who's speaking and basically create a sentence from your hashtag. But again, this allows you to comment in real time. And the amazing thing about Twitter is there are like 6,000 tweets in like a minute's time every day. So there are just an amazing number of people on Twitter. And what I've seen over the past couple of years is that every conference you go to now has a hashtag. And so, but if you have 100 people at the conference, I might see 5 to 10 of them actually using Twitter. So it's a way to really stand out if you're more of an early adopter, to kind of get yourself on the radar at that conference a lot quicker than not using social media. And this is true at conferences with NIH. I've been there before, and everybody has their little Twitter handle. So it's a way to, all of these social media outlets are the same thing, to find collaborators, to build relationships, and to reach a broader audience. And then again, as you join organizations, then they're going to be coming into your news feed based on the relationship that you've built. And then, as you kind of learn the basics, like the point of this webinar is not to teach you the basics of it, it's just to kind of give you an overview, because for each of these you have to actually learn how to use the media. So I started off with those three, and I'm coming back now to revisit LinkedIn and the ability to blog through that interface, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But how I got into using YouTube is that part of my research focus is teaching nursing home staff to use 3 different hand feeding techniques. And it's something that I role play a lot. Like if you ever see me in a conference, you'll know if I'm talking about my work, because I'll be doing this demonstration around direct hand feeding overhand feeding and underhand feeding. And it's really hard sometimes to write out those subtle differences in a grant. And I was actually revising the evidence-based protocol for managing meal times in dementia, and I thought, you know, it'd be great if I had a video and I could just drop it into this evidence-based protocol so that then through the Google Analytics I can also determine impact. Just so this is circling back to what I learned with the GNEC podcast. You know, part of tenure and promotion is around, you know, telling people what your impact on the field has been. So if I can give you, if I can quantify how many people have looked at this video, that's just a way to demonstrate impact over time. So I created my YouTube channel, did the video, put the link in the evidence-based protocols, and created a QR code that I can now put on posters. So even if I had left my poster up, someone, you know, with a smartphone could come by and click on the link, and they would be able to, they would be taken right to this video to demonstrate what the hand feeding techniques are. What I'll be doing with this as I move forward, oh, the thing here on the left for the uploads, that was a publication through Geriatric Nursing that allowed you to do a 5-minute kind of narrated PowerPoint. Forget the exact name of their software, but then you could embed that link also. So that was a way to actually have a 5-minute presentation of the publication, which is great. And so when I first did the hand feeding video, there wasn't any real science around how and when to use each one, but just had articles accepted for publication with JAGS. And now I can update my video, so, and they'll all be housed right here to talk about that paper, that now there is efficacy around which hand feeding technique tends to work. And it's just a way to have a kind of a more current dialogue about my work, and then to continue to update it in that way. And it wasn't that, I mean, if I can do this stuff, I'm telling you, it's not that hard. It does take a little bit of time to figure out how to do it, but if you have teenagers around or somebody else that already has a YouTube channel, you know, just get them to help you and talk to other colleagues about that. But again, you know, it's just a way to build a library of different things that you're doing all in one place. And the other part of that is that sometimes in your academic home you might have a faculty profile page, but that profile page, if you leave and go work somewhere else, everything that was in that page is kind of lost. And so I wanted a way to capture everything that I was doing, which is why now I'm moving into developing my own web page, so that no matter where I go, my page is the same, my branding's the same, everything's the same, and it's not dependent on the organization. And that's without putting any money into doing any of this so far. So because that's the cost consideration is the other part of it. So moving into blogs, the reason now that I'm looking at how to get into blogging and building that is because with the limited space on Twitter, you know, and other places, it would be nice to have a little narrative when you're making these comments beyond 140 characters. And an example of this would be maybe you remember a couple of years ago, Casey Kasem got lost, and this was before he passed away, like a couple of months after this incident happened. But it was on the national news that he had gotten in his car and he had driven away and he was lost, and they made the comment that he had Lewy body dementia. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if they know they need to search for him differently. I have a colleague in Florida, Meredith Rao, who's done work with first responders and how people with dementia, basically any form of dementia, if they get in a car and they drive away, they will drive until the car runs out of gas. So the first thing you have to find is the car, and then you will find the person within a mile of their car because they ran out of gas and they couldn't problem solve how to fill the car up to get it to go again. Versus if someone wanders out of their house, you'll typically find them within a mile of the house, but it's not like they're going to be walking around on the sidewalk like a lost person. They're actually going to get scared and they're going to hide because that primitive part of your brain is still intact even in in dementia, in very advanced dementia. So even just having that different spin on that national event, like if I had had my stuff together at that time. So that's one blog I have in the back of my mind for the next time it happens. So that's just a way to kind of do a more like 250, 500-word story that connects with your link. You run into people. I was talking to an accountant who said that he often was the first one to recognize that someone was beginning to have some early onset dementia. And I thought, you know what, that will be a great blog too. You're an accountant. What are signs and symptoms that you need to look for, and then how should you kind of handle it? So it's a way to educate other professions, family members, the media, etc. So that's kind of where I'm going next with this. So these are just some of the different steps. Knowing why you want to get involved in social media, knowing your audience, figuring out what your message is, and then what are the experiences that you bring to the table and the resources that you can connect other people with, and then figuring out which vehicle or which social media outlet is going to be the best for doing that. And then, even using programs that allow you to look at all of your all of your social media outlets all at the same time. Hootsuite is an older one, but there are other more current ones that I'll be looking into also. So thinking about why you want to get into the social media game, and the rest of this is going to be talking about how you create your brand and how do you get your message out there in a way that's professional. So the first thing you have to do is you have to know yourself, what your expertise is, and what expertise you might need to have a credible voice on whatever topic. We all know we have to do the scientific publications in the high-impact journals, and that's going to reach a certain set of the population, but using social media helps you bring it to the public much more quickly. But you have to have the science and the education and experience to back up what it is you're saying. So this is kind of like an add-on to what they typically teach you to do in school and as a new assistant professor. But figuring how do you anchor your personal brand within your company? How do you do it kind of outside of that? So when I do my personal website, it will probably have a link to my faculty page at the School of Nursing at Duke, but I want to primarily own that personal page so that it stays with me no matter where I go. Building the evidence base for your branding that shows and it tells your value. And you have to be able to do this in a way that doesn't sound so sciencey. Translating your scientific publication, I always pretend I'm talking to my grandmother, who most of the time just says, that sounds great, but how do you take what you're doing and explain it to somebody, and in a short period of time, because everybody's attention span is super short also. And then as you build your brand over time, making sure that you deliver on your promises so that when you show up in person to do a personal presentation, that if people have looked you up online, that they match. And then once you have your plan, you begin to build and maintain and then grow your impact in your field. So one of the ways that I've been working on branding, I did an intervention study this past summer teaching nursing home staff to use the hand feeding techniques and how to respond to different feeding behaviors. And in academics, we always love an acronym, so I needed a word that meant to eat, and it needed to have nurses and hand feeding in it. So came up with the word NOSH, which stands for Nurses Optimizing Supportive Hand Feeding, and had my logo done through Fiverr, Fiverr, and they did this logo for me for like $10, $15. And then the next step for me is to trademark this logo, because as I began to think about monetizing the intervention as I established that it's an effective intervention, I could have NOSH for the nursing home, NOSH for acute care, NOSH for families, but I have to have the brand and the logo to build that credibility over time. Another way this was really helpful with my research team, I had 11 employees this summer, and I knew they would all be going in and out of the nursing home at certain periods of time, and I needed people to know they were with me. So they all had to wear, navy blue or khaki pants, and we all had shirts, and it had the NOSH logo on it. Now the problem with doing a NOSH study in Durham is there's actually a restaurant there called NOSH whose logo looks completely different. But a lot of people thought we were caterers until we'd come in for a couple of times, and then they realized we were there with the hand feeding study. So this is just one way to make sure that when someone sees something that they automatically associate it with you or your study by having a logo. And then thinking about what are the things that you want to be known for and what are your areas of expertise. And this is just a word cloud that I developed to kind of do that. If you wanted a visual way to tell people kind of what you're about. Thinking about taglines, because this would be something I could put on my website or at the beginning of presentations that I were doing, but NOSH is about improving care for older adults with dementia, one meal at a time. That's my first attempt at a tagline. If you have better ideas, please send them my way. And then what are the things that you say all the time? Listen to yourself talk. This is actually helpful even with grant writing, because I will find myself saying the same things. And so those are my little sound bites. What are the 3 different hand feeding techniques? How are feeding behaviors, forms of communication, not necessarily resistance or refusing to eat a meal? And how do we get that paradigm shift out to people? So thinking about your audience, is the audience that you're trying to reach, are they ready? So this is a family photo we were getting ready to take, so that's my 3 kids and the rest of the family. Obviously they were not ready for my message, but you do need to think about who your audience is, because talking to a group of academics is going to be different than talking to family members. But most of what we do, we just need to be able to have that elevator speech ready to go. So whoever you run into, you can tell them very quickly what you're doing there. And this messaging was actually helpful with the research team, most of whom were either college graduates or seniors in college. And I said, so if someone comes up to you and they want to know what you're doing here, what are you going to say? And I got a lot of what I call verbal diarrhea, and they just kind of went on. I'm like, I don't even know what you're going to do here. So I kind of did the elevator speech and said, now you develop it, but you need to be able to convey your message in a very short period of time to then establish your credibility as a research assistant. So a good message, make sure that what's the one thing, and starting with this, what's the one thing you need your audience to know, the reason why it's important, what they should do, so kind of a call to action, and why is it urgent for this particular audience to act now on this. So I really liked this box because we tend to write we're trained to kind of do what's on the left, to write the abstract, the background, the methods for your study, and you have 12 pages, or maybe you have 6, depending on what you're writing for. But it's helpful to take that information and put it into this box. And then you have your sound bites and you have your message. So if people say, so tell me what you study, you tell them your issue. And they say, well, so what's the problem with that? So for each of these questions, I actually had a student who was going to go for an interview, and she was trying to summarize her work and where she wanted to go with it, and so I had to put it in this box and then said, so if someone asks you, what would the benefit be for studying this? You're going to have that, already going to have a couple of sentences to answer that question very quickly. And so this is what it looks like and this is from Escape from the Ivory Tower, which is a book around, how do you get your science to matter, and how do we take what we do as academics and as scientists and flip it into a message that that the lay audience can understand. and presents it in an interesting and intriguing way. Anybody, if you ever try to teach geriatrics, especially in nursing, selling geriatric nursing is a lot harder job than someone who has peds and mother, baby, or even emergency room classes, because that's what all the students already want to do. So ever since I got into academics, I've had to kind of figure out how to make geriatric sexy. So you need to do that with your message here too, and so this is just a template that you can use for that. So again, just knowing your what your budget is, how much time you have to devote to this. I would say, maybe spend 10, 15 minutes a day, just kind of maybe in the morning looking to see what's on social media. A lot of times I'll get ideas and then I'll have to think about it and get back to revisit it as I have time to do that. So again, thinking about how you want to use social media, what you want your message to be, being strategic about it and realizing that you don't have to be an expert in all of this stuff by the first of the year. I always start with kind of the low-lying fruit first because it helps you kind of gain your confidence, and you're not trying to do everything all at once, but being very, very careful about boundaries. And this is, I was talking with a hospital system here in the area and was saying, you can use social media if you're at a professional conference or you're making kind of a blanket, or you're responding to something that's going on, kind of a current event. And that's a different way of using social media versus, people making a comment about having a bad day on the 5th floor at a particular hospital at a certain period of time, where it's definitely like a HIPAA violation. So if you know we know what HPI is because we've all been trained as scientists and we have to get through the IRB. So you just want to be sure that you're not putting anything out there that's going to get you into trouble. So knowing what knowledge and skills you need. So when I first looked into doing the GNAC podcast, I went back to my home organization and said, who could help me with this? And they said, oh, you need to go see Tech Transfer. I'm like, well, who is that? But it's actually a department. It was in that school, and most major universities have one. But began to work with Tech Transfer because I had to get a contract between AACN and Hartford Foundation at NYU and UNCW to do those. Began to work with the marketing and communications department to figure out what software I needed to do to actually do the project. At Duke, there's an innovation and entrepreneurship department that's on my radar. There's a SciComm course, there's op-ed training. So any of the, I just kind of put down the broad categories, and I bet as you begin to look around your university, these are the people that will most likely be offering the training opportunities that you would need and be able to help you develop your plan, because it's not something that you need to do all by yourself. You can do most of the stuff on your own without a lot of heavy costs being involved. But but think about what are the benefits of me doing this myself versus getting somebody to help me. And anytime you can get somebody to help you, I would recommend doing that so that you're spending your time on the stuff that will get you promoted. Although this is part of it, and maybe not to people that are more senior to me. Actually, advice I was given around using social media, I was talking to the chair of our APT and search committee, and they said, you know what, you can use social media, but you need to be sure that it backs up your science and what you do. And so, because if you're just making a personal comment around like as a political candidate, that's not the same as kind of what I've laid out for you here, where I have the scientific publication in the journal, and here's the video that goes with it, and this is how I've disseminated it on social media, and this is the impact of that, versus here are the number of people that have downloaded my publication. So being very thoughtful about how and when you use social media is important. and thinking about what do you want to be known for. Like even the Dementia Care NP YouTube channel, because I was like, well, what do I want people to know? And I'm like, well, I want to be known as a nurse and a nurse practitioner, and I do dementia care. So, so trying to think that through, or do you want, is your brand your name? And there's pros and cons to doing it both ways. So that's just the way that I did it. So for references and different resources that I've found most likely, or most recently, This Escape from Ivory Tower is a book you can get through Kindle. A lot of great tips, and the framework I saw showed you is there. You have this presentation, which was adapted from one we did for the Hartford Center. Jen Dalton has a book around branding and how do you, and so it's called The Intentional Entrepreneur, but at the same time, it's all around intentionality and making a plan and thinking through your sound bites and your taglines and your brand. So it's always helpful to have a guide. And then this last one here is just with the ANA, kind of making sure that you don't step in it by using HPI and things like that. So it is 1:37, so I'm a little bit ahead of schedule. But there's the QR code that I mentioned that will take you to the hand feeding video that's on, so typically put on my posters. So I guess I can stop here and we can open it up to questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Batcher-Merhu. That was fantastic. We do have a few questions that fall into some similar areas. So you had touched on the balance between personal and professional identities on social media. Is there a way, or do you have any recommendations for a way to effectively balance that where your professional identity isn't being intrusive in your personal identity and vice versa?
So I think I've seen this done a couple of ways. Some people just have 2 email accounts, but to me, it's like, okay, well, which one am I trying to friend? Like, they're personal or they're professional? So to me, it's almost like I just have one Facebook account. I just make sure that whatever I post there, even though some of the stuff is personal, it's not anything that would make me look bad in a negative way. But you can have 2 different accounts, one for personal, one for business. The other thing, which I'm probably moving towards, is I will have my personal email account, but then I will create one for a business, because I'm getting ready to form an LLC as for a consulting business, and then I will create a business Facebook page. But so those are. But everything I do on Twitter and LinkedIn is only, well, most of it's professional, because you can, like, you could be at a Duke football game or a Duke basketball game and tweet about that, and that's not anything that looks negative. So I think you just have to remember, you know, everything you put on social media could potentially be seen by the public, and that's just kind of basic rules that that everybody should be aware of. But to me, I would prefer to have one account, and it's just one authentic person, instead of wondering, well, why do they have 2 accounts? What are they? Makes it seem like maybe they're hiding something. But maybe there's a good reason for that.
Great, thank you. Actually, to follow up on that, do you have any advice for people who maybe are transitioning into a new career, or just now maybe through this webinar or through a new title, thinking about maybe changing their social media presence? Would you recommend getting new accounts, screening previous things where maybe you weren't conscious of your professional identity?
Yeah, I would definitely screen whatever you have done. I mean, but even now, I mean, I think it's common knowledge that even employers and even colleges now are going to check out to see what your social media footprint looks like. So if you have anything up there that you don't want somebody to see, you need to get it down right away. And then there are privacy settings that you can have on things. So like my Facebook page is not open to the public. If I do one that's open for the public, I would treat that very differently than, like my personal one. So you have to look at your privacy settings. And I would definitely, before you made anything public, make sure that you clean it up, or just completely start over and think about what you want your brand to be and what you want your handles and stuff to be, and just create new accounts around that. And I think as you become an expert, that's kind of what you do too.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. We had a lot of questions about time. So obviously, early career, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of different ways that your time is stretched. How would you recommend people balance creating a strong professional identity on social media, but also not having it be such a time suck?
Yeah, so for me, like, I'm not on Twitter every day. I'm just not. I created my account, and then when I go to conferences, when people are speaking or as I'm networking and really using that conference, that's when you're mostly going to see me on Twitter. Or like for this event, this webinar coming up, you send out a couple of tweets, and that's really that's that low-lying fruit. Establish your Twitter account. And as you begin to go to conferences, that's kind of how I got more involved in it, because we do have other things that we have to do. So I would just recommend picking one. Like, I think that doing if you don't have a Twitter account, or establishing a new professional one, that's probably going to give you the most bang for your buck in the beginning, and then thinking through what you want the other social media outlets to do for you. And remember, I told you I started this in 2009, and so I'm 7 years into it. I mean, I don't have like a whole big enterprise going here. You pick something that you want to focus on that year, and then as you have time, or as you're out and about doing professional things, then you kind of build that expertise over time. But it's not like tomorrow you can sit down and say, these are the 5 things I want to do, and these 5 different, unless there are probably people out there that could do that. But I was not able to do that.
So do you think that there's merit in having a lot of different platforms, or do you think that it's more beneficial to have a few very well-developed platforms?
So for me, my tactic has been a few. So you can see, I mean, I have email up here. This is, everybody can get up with you by email. And I highlight my Twitter and my YouTube account. I don't even put LinkedIn up here. People do find you that way. But I think those 3 professionally, or Twitter and LinkedIn, are the 2 that I would start with. And if you have a Facebook account, you could do that. But at the YouTube is something that has come up in the past year. So my focus this past year was like, I'll get that started and see kind of how that goes. And now my upcoming year is going to be around looking at how do I get into blogging. And the reason I have put that off is because if you're going to do a blog, the recommendations are that you post fairly regularly. And so working with Jen, she's like, well, you need to have like a list of different blogs that you could do, and maybe have some of them written up, so it doesn't take as much time when you want to respond to something. You can kind of just pull it up and get it out there. So I would say fewer at a higher quality than a whole bunch.
Great. So we did have a question about YouTube, and it seems like your YouTube channel maps on really well to some of the work that you're doing, and maybe even providing a platform for staff trainings or different tips that are related to your work. If you're not in such an applied setting, is there merit to having a YouTube channel? One of the things that I've seen are people recording their lectures or talking about a research topic just one-on-one, or do you think that YouTube is really specific for applied careers?
So I personally haven't used YouTube for lectures. Another way to do that is slide share. Like you can put your, you can actually, that's another way to do that. I've never done that just because if I'm teaching a class, like you're going to pay tuition to come to class, so I don't want like my lectures to be out there. If I'm doing a presentation, again, it's so I haven't used it in that way. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. You just need to be careful about kind of the, I know that you can take the transcription of your lecture and you can have that copyrighted, but I haven't used it, have not used YouTube in that way. And the reason there's not more videos on the YouTube channel right now is because in thinking about how to monetize what I'm doing. I mean, people put things on YouTube all day long that are free for people to do. But I kind of want to protect my intellectual property a little bit more. So that's why I'm thinking if I created this website and had like a member model to where only certain people, like maybe if you saw me at a conference, then you could for free join my whatever club, or you could become a member to my website, and then you would have access to the YouTube videos. So that's kind of the more of the way I think about it, instead of just putting everything out there for free, because that could help you, but it could also hurt you. Like if you're not a good presenter, because I've seen a lot of those, and it's like, So just thinking through the pros and cons.
Okay, and I have a follow-up to that. Are there any other outlets or sources where you've come across where you've been hesitant to post something, again, because of protecting your intellectual property?
Well, I mean, I haven't expanded beyond Twitter and LinkedIn. And with LinkedIn, in thinking about writing blogs, I've actually met with an attorney to be sure that once you own the copyright to anything that you publish the first time that you publish it, but you can also compile like everything you've written and send it into the copyright place just to have everything copyrighted. So that's another reason why I hadn't gotten into the blog thing yet, but now I'm kind of ready to do that. But yeah, you just have to be very careful that you're sure who your audience is going to be, and thinking through how much access to whatever it is you're doing that you want to give. Like sometimes when you present at a conference, you have to sign a release that says you give permission for this presentation to be video recorded, and it's going to be shared on YouTube. And you can do that, but I wouldn't personally seek out doing that on my own.
Great, so we just have time for a couple more questions. One is about Twitter specifically, and it asks, are there any ways or the best ways to get around the character limitation on Twitter?
So if you have, well, Bitly is one, B-I-T-Y-L. So if you have a very long hyperlink you want to share, you can just go to that website and it will convert it into a shorter web link for you. So that's one way to share other sites within that character limitation. And then on kind of building on that would be if you have more to say than the 140 character limit, that's where I think combining that with a blog would be helpful. so that you would then put the bit.ly link into your, and then if anybody clicked on it, it would go right to kind of a more in-depth, where you can kind of say like read more at. So then you have to have your kind of your hook is all that you would put on the tweet, and then read more with that little bit.ly link, but you just have to have a place for it for people to go to.
Okay, thank you. And our last question is about people who are specifically using social media for professional networking and job searching. Do you have any advice for people who are using their profiles to find jobs specifically, or grants or anything like that?
So my advice would be to have a couple people look at whatever it is you're posting, because you have like 6 seconds to make a first impression, and that's true whether you walk up to somebody or they're looking at your website. So you want to make very sure that you have a high quality headshot, that everything that you've put on your profile is spelled right, and thinking about what image you want to kind of promote to the world. So if you're using these things to try to find a job, you don't need a casual headshot. You need to, and I showed you the difference between kind of how academics might just put their title. You may need to do more like the second example, where you're listing your expertise. So whatever you did your dissertation in, what other backgrounds you have, and really kind of using like a LinkedIn profile to kind of sell yourself. But I know that on LinkedIn is where I see most of the job offerings, like the job postings, as well as if you're following other organizations, you'll see where openings are. That's the biggest thing to me, is making sure that your online presence is very professional, and it's the image and the kind of persona you want people to see, and that it matches. Like I've had to get all my headshots updated because my hair is not long anymore, but I didn't do that till last week. So yeah. But if you send out that image and then you show up with short hair, it's like the two images don't match. And so that's what I meant about making sure that you show up the way you're representing yourself. So as you change and evolve, making sure that you're updating all of those things too.
Thank you, and I want to thank you on behalf of the ESPO Webinar Task Force for all of your work and time in preparing this presentation, and thank you again.
Well, thank you all.